Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really dense section of ancient text, the second chapter of First Chronicles. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Genealogies, lists of names. This sounds, well, maybe a little dry.
Yeah, and on the surface, maybe, but stick with us here, because buried within these lists are just incredible human stories, really surprising glimpses into ancient society, crucial historical connections, and even the bedrock, the foundation for some of the most famous figures in history.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to kind of cut through the sheer volume of names, find those vital nuggets, those bits of knowledge, and really uncover the compelling narratives hidden in this chapter. It focuses heavily on the tribe of Judah, right?
It really does. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Chapter 2 opens listing the 12 sons of Israel, the founders of the tribes: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, all 12. But then, bam, the very next verse just zooms in. Almost the entire rest of the chapter is detailing the descendants of just one son, Judah.
Okay, so Judah is clearly like the main event here. The text lists his first three sons, Onan, and Shelah. And right away, we hit this interesting detail, maybe even a bit uncomfortable. Their mother. She's identified as a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua.
Right. That tells you something immediately. Even at the very foundation of this key tribe, there were unions happening outside the immediate Israelite family group. It wasn't necessarily a closed system.
And then there's this really stark note, isn't there, about Judah's firstborn.
Yeah, it's quite dramatic, actually. The text just states it plainly. He was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. I mean, that's not just a footnote about someone dying. It's a direct statement of divine judgment for wickedness placed right there in the family tree.
Wow. So even in these lists, you get these reminders of moral accountability,
Right.
consequences.
Definitely. And after that, the chapter brings in Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, and it mentions she bore him Perez and Zerah. So Judah ends up with 5 sons listed in total. Shows how the lines continue, even through some pretty unconventional situations. We'll see that theme again.
Okay, so from Perez, we get his sons, Hezron and Hamul.
Yep. And from Zerah, there are 5 sons listed: Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, 5 in all, it notes specifically.
And then connected to Zerah's line, through Zimri somewhere in there, we find Akar, son of Carmi. And he's not just named, he's highlighted for something he did.
Right. Akar, the one who brought trouble on Israel by violating the ban on taking devoted things. That's a direct callback to a major event, a national sin involving things captured in battle that were supposed to be devoted to God. It shows how an individual's actions, part of their family record, could impact the whole nation, and we're remembered that way.
So the personal history is woven right into the national story.
Yeah, exactly. It's not separate. From Ethan's line, we also get a mention of Azariah. But the account really expands when it starts detailing the descendants of Hezron. He was one of Perez's sons. And this is where we find some, incredibly foundational lineages.
Okay, Hezron. 3 sons listed initially, Jeremiel, Ram, and Caleb. And following Ram's line, this is super important, isn't it, for understanding later history.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Ram's line traces directly. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. And Nahshon gets this specific note: the leader of the people of Judah. So significant figure.
Okay.
Then the line continues. Nahshon to Salmon. Salmon to Boaz. Boaz to Obed. Obed to Jesse.
And Jesse. Everyone knows Jesse, father of King David.
That's the one. So you see, this list isn't random at all. It's carefully, meticulously charting the direct path from Judah, the tribe's founder, through these specific individuals, right down to Israel's most famous king. It's like validating the royal family's credentials within the tribal structure.
Makes sense. And the chapter lists Jesse's kids, too.
Yeah, 7 sons, including David, and 2 daughters, Zeruiah and Abigail. And it's interesting, the daughters are named, and even their families get a mention.
Right. Zeruiah's sons, Abishai, Joab, Asahel, key military guys for David.
Exactly. Prominent figures. And Abigail, she was the mother of Amasa. And get this, Amasa's father was Jether the Ishmaelite.
Huh. Another instance of mixed heritage right there in these, really important family branches.
Yeah, it challenges that idea of, perfectly pure bloodlines. It reflects the reality of how societies actually interacted.
Okay, so that's Ram's line to David. What about Caleb, Hezron's other son?
Right. Caleb, son of Hezron. His line is also quite extensive. It details children by different wives, even concubines. One key line goes through his wife, Ephrath. She bore him Hur.
Hur. Okay. And his line leads somewhere important.
Yes, Hur's line leads to Uri, and Uri was the father of Bezalel.
Basil, okay, I know that name. The craftsman for the tabernacle.
That's him. The chief artisan, divinely gifted, who oversaw the making of the tabernacle and all the sacred items. His inclusion here is significant. It shows lineage wasn't just about kings and warriors. It also recorded people known for exceptional skill, for divine calling. Craftsmanship linked right back to tribal roots.
That's fascinating. And Caleb had other children mentioned, too.
Yeah, children by concubines Ephah and Maacah are listed, and his daughter Axa is named. Listing these different family branches, including those through concubines, it gives us a fuller picture. It shows how various lines within a larger clan were acknowledged and tracked.
Okay, so the text then loops back to Hezron himself.
It does. It details another line through a daughter of Machir, who was the father of Gilead, and it throws in this specific detail. Hezron married her when he was 60 years old.
60! That's quite a specific human detail to include.
Isn't it? A note about marrying later in life?
Yeah.
Anyway, this line includes Segub and his son Jair. And Jair is noted as controlling 23 towns in Gilead. Geography again.
And there's a bit of conflict mentioned there too, right?
Yes, another historical note embedded in the list. It says, Geshu and Aram captured some of Jair's towns, Havoth Jair, and Canath and its settlements, 60 towns in total. So this shows how these genealogies were directly tied to land, to territory. And they even recorded the military and political events that affected those land claims. It's history, geography, and family all rolled into one.
It's really more than just a list.
Absolutely. There's also a quick mention of another line through Abijah, born after Hezron died, connecting the family to Caleb Ephrathah. Again, place names matter.
Got it. Okay, what about Jeremiel, Hezron's firstborn son?
Right, Jeremiel. His lineage is also detailed, multiple sons, different wives.
Yeah.
But there's one thread in Jeremiel's line that is just, wow, really remarkable, unexpected. The line follows down several generations to a man named Sheshan.
Sheshan. Okay, what's his story?
Well, the text notes his specific situation. He had no sons, only daughters. But here's the bit that really stands out. He had an Egyptian servant named Jara.
An Egyptian servant. Okay.
And here's the kicker. Sheshan gave one of his daughters in marriage to Jarha, this Egyptian servant, and their descendants are then meticulously traced for 13 generations, right there in this Israelite genealogy.
Wait, seriously, an Egyptian servant's line traced for 13 generations within the tribe of Judah's record.
Yep. It's quite astonishing when you think about it. A powerful inclusion. It seems to demonstrate that lineage, the continuation of the family line, could actually transcend strict ethnic or social boundaries. It shows how even outsiders, like a foreign servant, could be incorporated into the core tribal record.
That really makes you rethink the whole purpose of these lists, doesn't it? It's not just about exclusion.
Exactly. It challenges assumptions about what they were only trying to preserve. It highlights a kind of inclusion, a way of ensuring continuity that was clearly valued enough to record.
Wow. Okay, so the chapter then circles back to Caleb again, Jeremiel's brother.
Yes, it provides a few more details about his sons and their connections to places like Beth-Sur, still weaving together family and geography.
And then finally it returns to Hur's descendants, the line leading to Bezalel we mentioned.
Right. Hur, the son of Caleb by Ephrathah. His sons are listed. Shobal, Salma, and Hareph. And they are explicitly linked to really famous places. Shobal is called the father of Kiriath Jearim. Thelma, the father of Bethlehem. Hareph, the father of Beth Gader.
Bethlehem. That's obviously huge. Connecting specific ancestors to the founding or control of key towns like that, it really anchors the tribal history to the actual land, doesn't it? Establishes those ancient claims and associations.
Precisely. And the lists continue, detailing various clans and groups linked to these towns and areas, Mephiboshetites, Zorathites, and so on, mapping out the tribal landscape.
And then there's one last really interesting group mentioned at the very end.
Yeah, the clans of scribes who lived at Jabez.
Yeah.
They even get specific clan names, Tirathites, Shemeathites, Sukathites, and they're linked to the Kenites who came from Hamath, who's called the father of the house of Rechab.
Scribes. Including a professional group like scribes in a genealogy seems unusual.
Highly unusual. It tells us something significant, perhaps about their status or their function within these tribal structures. Maybe they were the keepers of these very records. We don't know for sure. And their link to the Kenites and the house of Rechab connects them to another distinct group, known for particular traditions. Again, showing how interwoven society was.
Okay. Wow. We've covered a lot of ground there, a lot of names and connections. So stepping back, what do we do with all this dense information? What was the point?
Well, let's try to unpack that. I think fundamentally these genealogies were the absolute backbone of Israelite identity and society. Especially, for the community reading Chronicles, likely folks returning from exile. They needed to reestablish who they were, where they belonged,
Yeah.
their land rights, their tribal identity. These weren't just dusty old lists. They were like living documents, legal documents, history books, proof of identity.
Right, establishing tribal lines, validating land claims, clarifying inheritance, defining the clan structure, the whole framework.
Exactly, the historical and legal framework.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me, and hopefully for you listening too. It's those specific little human details embedded in the list. They just jump out, like the note about Er's wickedness and death shows divine judgment was part of their remembered history. The story of Achar's sin and its national impact tied right to his family line, and all those mixed marriages popping up, the Canaanite mother, Jethro the Ishmaelite, and that absolutely incredible inclusion of Jarha, the Egyptian servant, and tracing his line.
Yeah, those details are key. They show the history wasn't sanitized, It wasn't some simple, perfect story. It included judgment, sin, really unconventional family setups, and the surprising inclusion of outsiders. Think about Hezron marrying at 60, or Sel dying childless, showing how fragile a lineage could be, listing women, even concubines, as mothers who carried on important lines. These aren't just names. They're windows into social norms, challenges, the messy reality of how families actually worked and continued.
And the geography, always tying it back to specific places. Bethlehem, Gilead, Beth Zur, Kiriath Jearim, anchoring these family trees to the land, to the history of those places, even conflicts over the land. Plus, mentioning scribes at Jabez, it hints at a complexity, an organization within the clans we might not expect.
Right, so these lists, they're not just preserving names, they're preserving a really comprehensive history. Social structure, moral lessons, divine action, connection to the land, all of it.
So if our mission was to find the important nuggets in stories, well, they were there all along, hidden in plain sight. We charted the paths to famous figures like David and Bezalel, sure. But we also saw the surprising ways outsiders were included, the real consequences of choices, and that deep, deep connection between family history and land.
And this raises a really important question for us to think about. Given the level of specific detail here, sometimes difficult details about sin, judgment, mixed heritage, even foreign servants, what does the choice to include those things tell us? What did the compiler think was most important to preserve and remember about their past for the future? What kind of identity were they trying to build or reinforce by highlighting these particular threads?
That's a great point. It really makes you think about what we choose to record and remember in our own histories, doesn't it?
It does. And maybe a final thought for you listening to Ponder is this. When you see how much detail is given to some individuals and lines, what does the absence of detail about others tell us? Those who are just names with no story attached. What might that suggest about what ultimately mattered most to the people who put this history together? What was essential and what wasn't?
That's a fascinating angle to consider. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the surprisingly rich contents of First Chronicles chapter 2.
Always a pleasure. It's amazing what you find when you look closely at these ancient texts.